I've said this a few times, but MVC is another part of, you've got the ASP core, and you've got web forms, and you've got MVC, and all of them make HTML. So the same basic engine. If you're new to MVC, this is my little slide to show what it's like. So request comes in. We have routing, which turns a URL into a call to a method, right? Can I ask for a show of hands who here knows nothing about MVC and would like more information? And please be brave, because I don't. OK, good. So I'm going to spend a little time walking through this. So a URL comes in. It does not go to a file. It does not go to an ASPX file, right? So this instead calls an action method. This calls a method in a controller class. That controller class, or that action method, has one job. It needs to figure out what happens next and pass those results as a model to a view. Okay? So good controllers, I'm already away from the mic. Good controllers should be small. You don't want a lot of code in your controller. So most of the time, your controller should be using services or things like that. So the controller will execute some code, create a model. We already saw a model in web forms. It was a simple class. It's the same thing here. So we'll populate something like an album class or a person class. It's going to package data, and it'll send it over to a view. And the view's job is to take that information in the model and turn it into HTML. Okay? So it's going to use Razor syntax, which has HTML and little replacement variables to fill in the blanks. And then it returns that to the browser. Time for a demo. Not too many slides. OK, do you want to? First, I should start up. First, I should turn my slide off. There we go. So we'll bring up Visual Studio.
Yep, now I need to use the microphone for the live stream. So I also need to come here, I guess. Can you hear me from back? OK. So I will use this microphone as well. And we are going to create a new MVC application from the project templates that MVC installer is installing into our Visual Studio. So then we will see a simple application that we have through the templates.
Oops. There we go.
Okay.
Try to make some space here. Yeah. OK. So I'm going to say that.
Yeah, as you can see, there are lots of project templates we can see here. Also, you can fill up the spaces. After the last web tooling update, it is now very easy to fill in this space with the new project templates. So now we are going to choose the internet application template to have a look at.
OK. So quickly, I'll run through some of these. An empty one is what you would think. It's very empty with just some basic setup. If you create a new project with an empty template and hit F5, you won't see a web page. You'll see a yellow screen that says where it's not configured. Basic is also very simple. Internet application includes login, authentication, and some it looks a little nicer. And then we have some others. Intranet uses Windows Auth. We have mobile, web API. Some others we'll look at later. I'm actually going to use basic for this one because it's it's very simple. OK?
Yeah.
So now the one thing I want to point out is, like before, it's installing a lot of NuGet packages. Whoop. Sorry. So if we look down at the bottom, these are all the NuGet packages it's installing. Is this loud enough to hear me in back? Good enough? OK. So those are all those NuGet packages it installed. And the reason it's doing that is so that it's easy to update and to manage those. So actually, a new project doesn't include a lot of code to configure.
I would like to ask you something, John, here, because everybody is concerned about that, I think. Every time we created a new project, it is not going to going through the internet, right? To download those packages. Those packages are local, right?
That's a good question. So there is a local NuGet cache where, so one time when you create the project, then it actually caches a lot of those. So, and also when you do an install, it's going to have the most important ones there for you. So, and to see a list of those packages, there's packages.config. So if I open that up, this has a list of all these packages. So you'll see you have assemblies, but you also have things like jQuery. So a lot of, a lot of things. This is that web grease that I showed you before. So bundling and minification is already turned on. Okay. So first, let's look at the folder structure. So you'll see we use a lot of conventions, and we set things up in a way so that if I'm an MVC developer and you're an MVC developer, you can all go, you can look at a different application and know where things are. So we always have a models, a controllers, and a views folder. Okay? So I'm going to start with a model. So I'm going to create a simple model, and I'll do a person class. Okay, so this is, I'll call this person. And again, what's important with the model is it doesn't inherit from anything, and it's just simple properties, okay? So this one, I'm going to have an ID. And I'm going to have a few properties, a first name and a last name. Okay, so that's all required. That's all that's required to create a model. So now I'm going to add in a controller. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, the first thing I usually do is I need to compile, and the reason is because Visual Studio tooling won't show up that controller class first. So I'm just hitting Control-Shift-B to build my model class. So now I'm going to add a controller. One of the things we're working on for the next release of ASP.NET is currently you only see that add controller in an MVC project. And that's annoying if you want to use it with something else, an empty project or a web forms application. So we're changing that so that the add controller works with any ASP.NET application. So my controller needs a name. And then I'm going to use MVC controller with read-write actions using Entity Framework. If you don't like Entity Framework or you would like to use something else, you can do an empty controller, or you can do an MVC controller with empty read-write actions. And then you could plug in Hibernate or anything else, however you want to get your data. Okay.
Also, I guess you can write your own template, T4 template, to hook it up here, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a nice thing. If you we're trying to make it so we have some nice defaults, but you can change it how you would like. So you can extend what's in this list. You can also create your entirely new file, new project type. So we saw there, some things like empty project and internet application. But you can also, now we've added in things like Breeze and Hot Towel and some others, and you can make your own, and they will show up there. This is very useful for a company. If your company has the same JavaScript files or the same assemblies for logging or things like that, you can create your own project type. Okay, so now I need my model class. So I'm going to pick a person out of the list. And now I need a data context, and I don't have one. So I'm just going to call this person context.
What's going to create us, John? The person context is going to be the TV context class?
That's right.
Framework, right?
Yeah. So right now it's generating a lot of code for us. And this is called scaffolding. Scaffolding is where it builds some basic code that will work. You have two options here. You can use three. You can not use scaffolding and write all the code yourself. You can use scaffolding and build from it and change it around and make it work how you want. Or you can use scaffolding some and then throw it away, right? So this is however you want to use it. Scaffolding is nice when I have 45 minutes, right, to show off. I don't have time to type this fast. So first of all, we'll look, we had our person class. This is the person context. So this has a lot of comments, but this is all the code. Okay? So this is Entity Framework code first, and it's using a DB set. So now we'll look at the person controller. Person controller has, first we're using a context, and then we have a bunch of things to view the data. Okay? So if I run this, and I browse to /person, then I should see a list of people. So the same way we had a select method with web forms, this is our index method. So this is going to view a list. So the one last thing is, it also created for me a bunch of views. So we have a controller. This is the controller with a method, and its job is to create a model and pass that model to a view. Okay? So this is returning, it's returning a list of people. So now let's look at the index. Index is expecting a list, an IEnumerable of person. That's my model type. So this is a strongly typed view. And then it's just going through and it's displaying that information. So here we have HTML and we have HTML helpers. Okay? So let's run this and see what that looks like. Any questions so far? Thoughts?
Yeah, also, if you have a question and it's a good question, you are going to get a flash drive.
Yeah.
So
maybe even for a bad question.
yeah.
Okay, what happened there? The reason this error came up is we don't have a home controller. So I started with a basic application, and this doesn't have a home controller. And the reason that I'm getting that error is, if I look in my routing, so remember, all these kinds of things, bundling and routing and web API, all these configurations are in app start now. So if I look in route config, it's going to have this default route. So route is the process that turns a URL into a call to a method. Okay? So this is expecting, if I had called my controller home, and I'd made an action named index, it would automatically work for me, right? So I can actually do that. I'll create an empty controller called home. So I'll add, or you know what, scaffolding was so quick, I'm just going to delete this and rename it to home, okay? So I did, it was a little bit slow when I did it the first time because I was talking. Let's see if I can do it a little faster this time. Okay, so I'll call this home controller, and we'll use person. No. Okay. One of the nice things with scaffolding is because it generates code for you, you can create some code and delete it. Make a change, throw it away, you know. And so it's very quick to try things out. So here it's building all those again, but it's calling it a home controller instead of a person controller. Okay? And now, remember how it said before that I would browse to /person? Now it's saying I browse to /home. And there's a little trick here, which is that the routing has a default controller of home. So if I just browse to the base URL of the site, it's automatically going to work. Okay? So the URL, I started the app up. Routing is saying go to the home controller, look for the index action. Okay? And then that index action is going to create a model. Our model is a list, an IEnumerable of person. And then it's going to pass that to the view, which is this. And it's going to list all the people for me. Right now, how many people are going to be in that list? Approximately 0, right? Because we just started this. So here's my list of people. So now I'm going to go in and say create new. And I'll say my person's name is, you know, John Galloway. And I say create, and that added a person.
It actually really went to the database, right?
It did.
Went to the SQL database and it uses what, SQL Express or local DB?
This is using local DB.
Local DB, right.
Yep. Okay, so let's look at how that worked, because I went really fast and I wasn't clear about what I was doing. When I clicked on that button to add a new one, this browsed to /home/create. So let's look at where that came up. So if we go into the controller, the routing said, you know, the controller name is home, the home controller, and then the method should be create. So let's look in this list. So the first time when we just call the get method on home, get is when you display something without making changes. So here it said return a view. And that view is actually just empty. It's an empty form. So I fill out that form, and then when I hit submit, now it needs to process it. Okay, so it's going to post back that form. And this is where we do that model binding. We validate the person, and we save it. Okay? So when I went in, when I clicked the Save Person button, I don't have to do anything to map anything back and forth. The form already has the same names, and it's able to just say, I created this form. I know how to get data out of it. All right? So it binds that person, and then it says, if it's valid, save it to the database. Any questions so far? We're going to move on now to entity framework migrations. And the idea there is, if you're changing, we have two things that can get out of sync. We have a database, and we have our model class. And if we change our model class, and the database is not in sync with that, it's going to have a problem. If we go into the person, let's say our person, we changed our minds, and we also need to track the person's age. So I'm going to go in and change that age, or add that. Okay, so I'll say, now here's our problem. Our model has that age, but our database doesn't. So that's not going to work for us. So what I want to do is enable entity framework migrations, and then we'll do that. So I'm going to bring up the package manager console. Now, how do you normally bring up the package manager console?
I would go tools and package manager, but there is also a quick launch.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can use the quick launch.
Okay, so
I'm
here.
a dummy guy, but I know the quick
Yeah, but you seem to know that one pretty well. Okay, so here I went Control Q, or you can click on it, and I bring up Package Manager Console. Package Manager Console is used for NuGet, but it's also, this is how you set up entity framework migrations. So I'm going in here, and I'll say Enable Migrations.
Also, for the advanced people, I think it's worth mentioning that this is also a PowerShell console, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So this is running PowerShell. You can do any PowerShell you want there.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's how the entity framework team enabled migrations, I guess, through a PowerShell script. It is using the migrate.exe file behind the scenes.
Yes. Yeah, it's true.
I'm not a dummy guy.
You're not very dumb. We need a better dummy. Okay, so here it did a few things for me. One is it configured my migrations. Am I still talking loud enough? Sometimes I try to start talking loud and then I forget about it. So here it configured my migrations. And there's no real code in here, but it includes a seed method. And this seed method is where I could fill in some basic data. So this is very helpful for a few reasons. If you have test data, or like in my album or my music store example, if I wanted to have a list of types of music or countries or things like that, I could put that in my seed data. All right? I'm not going to use that now. We also have this migration, and what it did was it looked at my person class, and it figured out a migration for it. So it said, all right, when I first run this to update my database to work like my model, I need to add in three things. An integer, and that integer was not nullable, so it sets that up. And it also sets up a person name, first name and last name. Every migration has two steps, up or down. So up is how to configure, how to make this change, and down is how to remove that change. So what would down be? What would the opposite of setting up this table be? Drop table. Who said that? There you go. Standards are low for getting a key today. Oops, sorry. Okay, so that's exactly right. If we look down here, this is going to drop that table. So now this configures the migration. I have one more thing, which is I need to actually run this migration on my database. There are two reasons I'm showing you this entity framework migration stuff, if you're curious. The first is because it's a good idea for how to manage your data. Second is, in order to actually deploy this using the Visual Studio tools, it requires that any database that I add actually be using entity framework migrations. So if I've got entity framework code first, I must have migration set up in order to deploy it to Azure. Because the team said, if you're using entity framework code first and you're not using migrations, there's a good chance your database is going to get out of sync with your model. Okay? So now I work away for a little while, and then I decide I want to actually change my person class. So I'm going to go through and close a bunch of these things down. So now I'm going to go into my person class, and I'm going to say I also want to, I have a few changes. One is I want to add an email. Okay? So now I want to add in this email property. So now I need to update my database to work with that. So I'm going to add a migration. So I'm typing in add migration, and then I'll say added email. Okay? And what's the next step after adding a migration? I need to update my database, right? So first let's look at that new migration it created, and then we'll update the database. So here's added email. And you'll see the only change is we need to add a new column. And then to undo this change, we drop the column. Right? So this is very simple. But it's an organized way of tracking changes in my model and my database. So now I could run a migration going all the way back to the beginning state, or I can go to any of these levels. I can run a migration to move to a specific state. Now, when I run update database, I'm actually going to also include -verbose, and that's going to show me the SQL code that it's going to be running. So I'll say update database. Okay? So we're going to see that it's going to say, it should say something like alter table people add. There it is, right? Now, it used nvarchar max because I used a string, right? Because a string can be how long? Billions of characters, right? Strings, it's huge in .NET. So I realize I've made a mistake because my database, I don't want an nvarchar max. I really would prefer maximum length there of 255 characters. So I'm going to use a data annotation for that. So I'm using system.componentModel.data annotations, and I'm going to say, let's make it 255 characters. Okay? I also realized, well, that'll be, yeah, I also realized I need that to be required. We need to have that needs to be required. So I'll say required.
So these data annotations are going to work with the SQL table and also going to work with the MVC, right?
Yes. Yeah, they work in both. Yep. So we'll see when I make that change, we'll see that change works in the validation, and it also exactly is going to update that database. So I'll add migration. Okay. So it's going to create that migration or it's going to create the migration for me. So now let's look at what changed in there. It made up a name for me. I could rename this if I wanted. So it altered that table. It made it nullable false, so it's required, and it set the max length. Okay? So this is actually pretty readable code. And then to undo that, this is an example of a down migration that's slightly more complicated. So here it's just changing it back to string. Okay? Now we'll run update database, and we'll look. This is our last migration we're going to run, but we'll do update database, and we'll make it verbose again to see the SQL code. Okay. Did I not run it? Column does not allow noise.
I think because there is already a record inside the database.
You're right.
And yeah, it's not comfortable to change that.
Okay. I forget what I want to do now to undo that. I think I can do down, but I forget what that is.
We might delete the
Migration?
No, delete the record through.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Explorer.
This is a little tricky to find it sometimes in here. Okay. It doesn't show it in this one. I think I may need to go back to a previous one. Or I could delete that. I could delete that nullable. You know what I mean? Because I said nullable is false. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this migration. There's probably a lot of other better ways to do this. So I'm going to remove this required for now. Okay? So we'll say, what?
Sorry? Default value.
I should have set a default value. That would, yeah, I could have done that. So let me see if this works. So set. I tried to get too fancy and do two things at once. Usually what I do when I'm doing this, I'm trying to hurry it up a little bit because it's coming up closer to lunch. But usually I will go through and do a lot of migrations and do a little bit in each one. So now let's see if this works or if I need to, I don't know what. Okay. Good. So this one went through and altered the column and it set it to varchar 255. Okay. So the one I just did in Denmark, I went through and did several, and I made things required and not required and all that. But I think you get the idea. All right. So now let's run this and see what this looks like when we browse to it. So this is going to go, again, to the home controller. It's looking up the index action, and it's going to get a list of people from the database. Okay, so there I am. What happened here? Where is my email? I actually know this one. I didn't update my exactly, perfect, okay? So what I need to do is I need to update my scaffold. So that's an important thing to know about, is that the scaffold is actually, it's generated once and it doesn't update as you change your model. So there are different ways of handling that. I could go in and just update the view, or I can just rescaffold. And that's the really lazy man's way of doing it. And I'm pretty lazy.
Developer's way, I guess.
Yes, yes. Okay. So again, here I'm going to go to the person class. I've got the person context already. So now it's rescaffolding, and it's going to add in that person class, the updates to the person class, to the list, to the edit, to the delete, all the different views for it. So now we'll look at the edit, or the create, let's say. So now I scroll down, and I'll see in here that we also have an editor and a validation message. So this is important. We just added a validation rule for that person class, which says that the max length is 255 characters. So we'll test that out.
Also, lots of people wonders that why we have editor for or something like that instead of just using a raw HTML there.
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay. So he asked, why are we using editor for instead of just the simple one, and instead of just hard coding it?
Yeah, raw HTML, right?
Right, and we can do that, but there are a few reasons, and one of the better ones is that we can change things over time. So there are editor templates that we can go in and modify. We can create custom editor and display templates in our project. So inside of the views, we can add those in. So that means, so that's one nice thing. So we could say, for instance, every time there is a text field, make it bold or something.
Yeah. Also, I guess the editor for also adds the validation rules
Yes.
to
Yep.
the input.
Yeah.
So it works like that.
Good. So let's look. And a third reason is because we can go in and the same way that we used, if we look in our person class, we could set a name. So here this says first name or last name, and it's no space in between. And we can change the display name for that, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So now let's look over at this. And this has no email. So I'm just going to start typing in. Now I could also have rules in there that make it, validate. So I could have a, okay. So that I could have broken email validation. But this is Ajax validation. So this error message right here, I didn't update anything, and it just called, it used some jQuery validation to update that. And if we look at this, any questions? People talking about stuff? Okay, so here are those validation rules that Tuborg pointed out. So if we look at, I think it shows there, yeah. So those are our errors, and they're included as HTML5 attributes. So we have max length, 255 characters. So that's included there, and then there's some JavaScript that automatically makes that work, okay? So I'll fix that. Put in a real email address and hit save. Okay, so this is a very basic application. I'm going to want to upload this to a hosting provider. So I'm going to show you using Windows. Do you think there's anything else I should show before I do that?
No, I don't think so for a small application. But I want to point out something that the .NET 4.5 has a new validation attributes. For example, we are not going to the format of the email, but there is an attribute, I guess, right? Email attribute.
Is it data type, I think?
Yeah. Yeah. No, email. Just email.
Email. Okay. Email address.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
This is gonna validate the email address format. So it's actually using the regular expressions behind the scenes.
Let's try it.
Before .NET 4.5, we had to use regular expressions and put the really wrong regular expression there. But now we don't. But I'm not sure if it's going to work with the jQuery validation.
That's right.
But it's going to work on server side.
Yeah, you're right. And there is a way to change the jQuery validation to add that, but it's a pain.
iModule validate or something like that. There's an interface to hook into ASP.NET MVC's data annotation attributes, so you can change the markup.
Yeah, I've done that before, but it takes a little bit of work.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, an easy way to deploy something is you can right-click and hit Publish. And you can publish to anything. There's support for a lot of different things. There's FTP publish. There's also web deploy, which is what I'm going to show you. What I'm going to show you would work with IIS 7 or whatever. It'll work with IIS. I'm going to show you using Windows Azure because it's really quick to be able to spin up a new free site for me. So I'm going to go in here and go to manage.windowsazure.com. Log in, log in.
Hardest part of the demo.
Type it wrong, get locked out. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a new website, and it's going to also include a new database. So as I'm doing this, I'll just show you a few of the different ones. It's loading up. This is actually, they used to have a Silverlight-based managed studio. Now this is all HTML5, and it does a lot of loading things through jQuery. It's pretty slick. If we look at my websites, I've got a lot of different websites. So here's, as I mentioned before, we had dev camps, and we have dev camp staging and all those. I just want to show you quickly. For dev camp staging, this is the one where we go through and the team deploys things during the day, and we're using git push deploy. So we'll do our work, we'll deploy to staging, then we'll deploy to production. There's some developers in Argentina working on this. I make changes. Some of them work. So here are some example recent changes, and we can say, well, you know, maybe I don't like these changes that Juan made, and I'm going to roll back to an earlier one. So I can actually drop this down, and I can see what's changed, and I could redeploy a previous version. So this is a neat feature that I like there. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a new site, and I'm going to use custom create so that I can include a SQL Server database. So I'm going to call this Istanbul WebCamp. And then I'm going to throw in a bunch of numbers at the end so that you can't type faster than me, hopefully. OK. So now I'm going to put this on my MSDN account. I could do it with any. You can have several accounts on there. So I'm going to, what do you think, Western Europe?
Yeah.
OK. And now I want to include in here a new SQL Server database. And I'll say next. And I think I'm going to create a new server. So this is the most boring part of the demo where you watch me type. But it is pretty quick that it's actually going to spin up a new server and database for me. OK. And now I'll say OK. So now it's building that site for me, and then I'll be able to load that into my application. So this is the little thing where it's telling me that it's working away and it's building that. And when it's done, OK, there it's finished. So that's actually pretty quick. It's created a new database server. It's created a new provisioned a new website for me, and it's also set up the configuration between the two. So now I could, if I browse to that site, I'm going to see a "there's nothing here yet" page. So it says, you know, you haven't deployed anything. When I click on this, this is going to show me some basic things I'd want to do. And I could go back into this dashboard and see more information. So I'll see here, you know, nobody's used the site yet. Here's some additional things I could do. So I'm going to download my publish profile. A publish profile contains all your login information. So this is the authentication for my database and all that. That means that it does include passwords. Okay? So it's important to keep those safe. Those are something that you probably wouldn't want to upload these into source control, or you'd want to be very careful. When I import these into my Visual Studio application, those are all encrypted. All right? So this is the only file that I need to safeguard. So that's in my downloads folder. Now I'll go in here and I'm going to import those published profile settings. Before I do that, I want to take one little quick look at my web config and see if I've got, yeah, I have 2 contexts and I'm going to delete that one. I just want the person context. So now I'm going to right click and say publish. And normally when you're publishing in the past, you had to configure a lot of things. My database connection and all those things. Now I can just say import. And I can import these published profile settings. And it's all pre-populated, all that for me. So now I can click on validate connection, and it's actually connecting to Azure and making sure that all those things are correct. Remember, this is working for Azure, but would also work for an IIS site that supports web deploy. So this is really pretty handy. So that says that's correct. Now here, it's checking my settings. And this is the reason why, this is a reason why I used migrations, is because in order for this to work, in order for it to deploy my database, I have to have migrations enabled. This is the final part before I deploy, and it has a preview which shows all the files to upload. For this one, preview failed. Excellent. I didn't select the database, I guess. Let's try that again. So here what it's doing is it's looking at all my assemblies, my database. There it is. Okay. It has in here all my DLLs and everything that it's going to upload. This is the good and the bad side of everything with all those things that are included with NuGet is the first time I deploy, it takes a little time to upload all these assemblies. The next time I deploy, it doesn't need, for instance, JSON.NET or Entity Framework. It doesn't need to deploy those. So we'll make a small change, and then we'll upload that, and we'll see that the next upload only changes one file. So now I hit publish. So it's going in, and you can see on this list, it's actually, it's building a package, it's adding all the directories, it's setting all the permissions, okay? Copying all those files up. That actually seems pretty quick. So now we'll refresh this page. So it's actually on the server. It set up my database, it set up my website, and it's ready for me to go. So now I can go in and I can say, oh, I spell your name wrong sometimes.
Yeah, everybody does that. You are not the only one to spell my name.
Is that right? No. Okay. And, right?
Oh, it actually worked.
Yeah,
See that?
it did. So if we take this away, that's not a valid email address, right?
Yeah.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
And if we look at our, let's take a look. I love the internet. It's so fun. Okay. So here we go into those attributes, and there we have our validation.
Yep, data val email, right?
Yeah. Data val, that's the one, right?
Yeah.
So neat. Okay, so now if I hit create, this is actually saving this in that SQL Server database up on Azure. So I'll make one more change here to show that it's pretty easy once I've deployed it the first time. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to update the view. I could actually, and I do sometimes if I have a little bit more time, I'll go through and I'll update the model and do the migrations and stuff, and it'll actually make those changes up in Azure once I've deployed it. So I'm going to go in here. We'll add a new tag. Right? So I've made my change and I want to deploy it. So I just right-click on the right-click on the application, and I say publish. And now it already knows all my settings, so it's just asking what do I want to change. And so here, It's determining changes, and we should see the change that I made to the layout, and it's also including web config, okay, for any changes there. So those are only 3 files, and they're very small. So let's see how long this takes to deploy. So it's actually already built the package. It's already deployed it. Spinning it up. So here's where it would run any migrations that we'd made. And you can see up at the top, that's, that it's made that change. So I've been showing using web deploy. There are other options, which I don't have time to go into now, but git push deploy or team foundation deploy are some other nice things. And with those, you can make very quick changes, and through the day, make a change, deploy, make a change, deploy. I like this because as long as before I deploy this to the internet, I'm not really a web developer, right? I'm just working on my laptop. If you're a web developer, it's nice to have things actually up on the web. And so I like to be able to go in and make changes and actually deploy them to a server during the day, just as part of my work. So.
Also, I saw that latest updates to Windows Azure include the Dropbox support, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can directly push to your Dropbox folder, and it's going to update automatically. But it's not going to run migrations on all that stuff, but it's going to be a nice way to host your HTML files there.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of options. And you can also FTP up and down. So I've done some other, some talks I have where I have more time for this. I go through and I'll create a PHP site or a classic ASP.NET site and FTP some files up, and it all works. So, yeah. Huh?
Istanbul WebCamp, now create now your site.
You can create.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So what he's saying is that this is public, and you can go in and start creating people as well.
He deserves a flash drive, right?
Yes, he definitely does. So this is a very important point. This is now up on the internet, and he's going in and he's going to create some people, right? So you can go in and add to the list. And again, this is really nice to be able to work with, work with a team or to deploy something for QA or whatever. So we're at 11:35.
Enough time for HTML and jQuery stuff, right?
So that sounds good. Okay. So before we move on to the next session, right before lunch, let's take any questions that we have on MVC. Any other questions on what we've covered? Yeah.
Can we use as a framework its
Yes.
after deploy? How can you use this framework?
The question is, how do you use it after you've deployed?
Yes.
So if you want to use Entity Framework and you already have a site that's deployed, there is a way that you can go into your database and you can create an entity model from your database. And then the new way for Entity Framework, it actually creates those code first classes. So then you can work from there. So that's called database first. And then once you've got that, you can just deploy to Azure the same way I just showed.
Yep, there is a tool, Entity Framework tool, I guess, tooling support.
Yeah.
That you can reverse engineer your database code first. So it's a very nice way. You just go to your database once and reverse engineer the SQL statements to your C# classes, and then you are going to continue your way as a code first style. So you only need to deploy it once, and then you are going to be able to use the migrations, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me see. One other thing that I want to show that's a little more advanced, someone had asked during the break about hot towel in some of these. So there are other things that we can add as part of the newest update. We also have support for templates. So I'm just going to go in here and type a hot towel. This is one of the new templates. So in order to do this, you create a new Visual Studio extension, a V6, and that sets up something more complex. So there we could create, one of these others. So this is for if you would like to do a more extended one. So there are others beyond. I just showed basic, and there's an internet application that has a login. but there are some other more advanced templates if you would like as well. I guess we'll stop here and I'll do the HTML5 one. Thank you for your help. Next time you need to be dumber. Okay, so this is the last session before lunch. We're going to be looking at HTML5 and jQuery. All right. Now, I have a problem with this talk, which is, this is where I'm supposed to talk about things, in addition to some other things. This is where I also am supposed to talk about things like less and CoffeeScript, but I always get excited earlier in the day and I talk about some of those things early. So I'm only going to show you how I got that set up, but we've already seen that at the beginning. And so we'll look at a few things, which we'll look at, what is HTML5. We'll look at how it's set up in the newer templates. I'll kind of overview jQuery. This is the one I already showed off a little bit, and we'll look at these two. So first of all, HTML5. Am I still talking loud enough where I can walk around? Can you hear back there? Yeah? Somebody say yes, no, thumbs up. Good? Sideways? Maybe a little? Okay. So HTML5. HTML4 was around for a long time. And all the browser vendors started doing their own things to add in, make you want to use their browser. HTML5 is a way of taking all those different things and making them a standard so web developers don't go insane. And so we have support for a lot of different things that are actually, this is a list of what's required to be, in the new specs. This is really key. Target features, not developers. So if you're writing code that says, if this is Internet Explorer, do this one thing. Or if this is Chrome, do something else. Or this site does not support Internet Explorer. Or this site does not support Chrome. That's the wrong way to be doing it. That's not the correct way to develop for the internet. Instead, you should be detecting features. So we have some things that are built in, and I'll show you this when we look in the MVC4 template. We have some things built in to make it easier to do that. So the idea is browsers will change all the time. You're going to get new browsers. Let me show you. I was just in Copenhagen, and I did a presentation talking about how hard it is to keep up as a developer. Things are changing so fast. So here was one of my slides that I showed on. I showed this slide on Tuesday. There were actually 2 sessions of this conference. So this is a list of all the browsers that have come out since the mid-90s. So there was, browser wars early on. Here's Firefox, started to have a lot of beta versions and early versions. But then, starting in about 2004, things were relatively kind of easy, right? And then, all of a sudden, starting in the past few years, we have a bunch of Chrome releases. We have a bunch of Opera releases down here. We have a bunch of Firefox releases. They're changing all the time. So I gave this session on Tuesday. I got my slides already. I was very happy with them. Thursday morning, I got up to I was about to give my talk, the first talk of the day, and I started reading on the internet that Google and Opera had announced that they are forking the WebKit project. And now they're going to have a Blink rendering engine. So this is yet another, on this is already, in one day, was already out of date. So you can't keep up with all the browsers that are out there. You shouldn't be writing code that targets this version and maybe this version and this browser and not that browser. Instead, you want to write code that works for the correct features that you need in your application. I have a hobby. I have some silly hobbies. I have a hobby where I debug when I go to a website that says your browser doesn't support this, sorry. I go into the JavaScript and I debug and I find the line of code where it says if user agent equals Internet Explorer or if user agent equals Chrome. And I change that and then the site works. And I find this over and over. So write to detect features and not browsers. I want to show briefly an example of this. I'm just going to show this site. It's called Contre-Jour. This is an example of the kind of thing that you can do in an HTML5 browser. So this is using the canvas tag, and this is a game, an HTML5 game. Let's see if it loads for me. And this actually also has, audio and everything using HTML5. And something to notice here once it actually loads. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So, this is a game, and it's. Let me skip over the credits. Right. So in this game, I need to move this little guy over, collect the thing, move to the next. Right. So this is not. If you showed this to a web developer from 2005 and said this is a web page, they'd look for the flash tag, and this is all completely just HTML5. I'm just going to play this game now, okay? So this is an example of the sort of thing that you can do using HTML5. There is a huge amount of stuff that's in the HTML5 specification. So if we look at this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. So some bigger things, SVG is scalable vector graphics. So that's a vector format. Instead of drawing little pixels on a screen, we can draw shapes now. So there's a lot that you can do with that. I'm a huge fan of SVG. I use this a lot. And I'm happy to see it finally on the, available in all modern browsers. I'm going to read every single item in this list for you. To see if you pay attention. These are all these different APIs that are included in the HTML5 specification. So there's a huge amount that's been added. And really, again, this is the kind of thing where we have a lot of each browser has been saying, well, I'm going to add touch support, or I'm going to add support for vector graphics. And so they finally all got together and came up with a combined specification.